What's up, y'all? Thanks so much for clicking on the video. My name is Leah, and let's recap and review Real Housewives of Potomac. This is season 10, episode 17, titled Karen Comes Home. And let me just say this, the sneak peeks bamboozled me because the Karen that I was expecting us to get is not the Karen that we got in the episode. And that is concerning. Okay, but let's get into this review. All right, y'all. So let's get into this review. So the episode opens up, and I do appreciate that they gave us a timeline of how we got here, even though we all know how we got here. But I do appreciate the timeline. So the first date we see is March the 19th, 2024. They show us the infamous body cam footage. And when I tell y'all, my stomach dropped into my butt because the secondhand embarrassment I get when I see these clips, like my back tenses up because Karen looked bad. She looked wet, is sweaty, like she looked, oh, and that wig was in the middle of her head, like it was too much, y'all. And then to hear Ray say please when they started to arrest her, I said, oh my God, this too much. This too much. So they show us Karen getting arrested with the police, Ray being there, as well as the fire department there to survey her car because it did catch on fire after she hit that tree. Okay. So the next date we see is February the 26th, 2025. And that is actually the date that Karen got sentenced to 1 year in jail. And we see two news anchors talking about Karen's sentencing. Then we have a clip that I think a lot of us have seen, and it also confused a lot of us, or at least it confused me. Because when they showcased the trailer for the reunion, they did not showcase the video of Karen when she's in all white with the perfectly coiffed hair, saying her like thank yous to all of the ladies except Wendy, snubbing Wendy. They showed us this video image of Karen with her winter hat on, in a pullover, sobbing about going to jail. And that's the video I thought they were going to show the ladies, not her in all white. So I don't even know why they put this in here because what they showed us of that was very brief. We just knew Karen was terrified of going to jail, which to me I felt made her more human because even though she did wrong, I think anybody would be terrified to go to jail, especially if you didn't come from a lifestyle of like that was the norm around your around you. Like I'd be terrified to go to jail. That's why I don't do bad things because I don't want to be in jail and I don't want to be in prison. Okay, I'm not built for that. I'm too soft. All right. So the next date we get is March the 1st, 2025. And this is the first episode of Real Housewives of Potomac that they filmed, where Giselle has invited the ladies over and everybody's coming to terms with the fact that Karen got sentenced to 1 year in jail. You have Kiarna being like, y'all, Karen is really in like jail. Like she has to bathe, use the bathroom in front of people. And you see the cameras show different shots of like the ladies all like looking somber and like it really setting in that like Karen is in jail. Okay. And what that looks like for all of them who are close to her in many different ways. So then the next day we get is May the 3rd, 2025. And this is Karen's birthday. And we saw this episode throughout the season where it is Giselle, Ashley, Cookie, and Kiarna, and they meet up at Tally Ho. Giselle lets it be known that Karen wasn't really talking to a lot of people, just certain people in her friend circle. And she was like, you know what? She understands. We see Giselle end up asking Cookie, is there a possibility for Karen to get out early? And Cookie's like, yes, there is a possibility. So then the next date we get is September the 2nd, 2005. And this is when Karen is released in her jail braids, okay, with her scarf on, and she is accompanied. I think this is her lawyer because he does go in the house with her, and I don't think he was driving the car, but I'm gonna just call him Karen's handler. But he picks her up from jail. You can tell that Karen is definitely anxious, and I would be too. Because part of me, if I ever went to jail, like I said, I don't never want to go to jail, but if I ever went to jail, I probably would be anxious the day that I get out because it probably would not feel real. Like, I think in the back of your mind, you would think like, oh, is this a dream? Like, get me as far away from this prison or jailhouse as possible. And I'm only basing my feelings about this from me. But when I used to really watch Love After Lockup, anytime that they would pick up the people that, the felons or, people from jail, because not everybody in jail is a felon, they would always be so anxious, and they would tell everyone like, get me in the car and just drive, 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 drive. And then eventually you would see them calm down the farther away they got from the correctional center. So I can imagine her feelings being like, her energy just being all out, like you just feeling shaky. Like I feel like I would feel shaky, like I was about to have like a panic attack or an anxiety attack. So she's in the car, heavy breathing. We see her waving to people that showed up to the jail to see her leave the jail. What's funny to me is like, I remember when Karen was released, and the opposite angle or the different point of view we got of the people who are outside of the jail, like videotaping Karen waving at them. So seeing this opposite angle or this different perspective is actually interesting. So we have this one moment where this guy ends up trying to ask Karen a question saying, any message for your fans? And Karen basically, rolls up the window, and you hear the guy say, Karen, wait. Now, I feel like that was a producer plant, because we didn't hear nothing about Karen being like rude to somebody or, rolling the window up on them. Okay. But she was just like, I hope that wasn't rude, but that's my message. So we end up going to Karen and Ray's house. We see Raven, her daughter, her sister, her younger sister, Bridget, and Ray, her husband. Ray bought flowers. Then he got this sad little sign that says welcome home with 2 balloons from Dollar Tree. I said, Ray, you couldn't do better. But I said, I'm going to let you have it, Ray. You done been through it with Karen. So when Karen finally gets home, you can tell that she is overcome with emotions. And I'm not going to lie, this first part almost got tears out of me. It did. When Karen looked like she was about to cry when she saw Raven, and Raven like ran to her, and the happiness that was like all over Raven, like I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Like I was just like, oh my God. Like I was like, Leah, stop. Like I was like, am I about to cry? Like what is happening here? And then she hugs Ray, and then Ray hugs her, and then Raven hugs both of them at the same time. And then when she saw her sister, y'all, I almost lost it, because when she was like, and Bridget hugs her, she said, I told you this too shall pass. I said, Jesus. Said, this is not about. I was like, I am not about to cry. I refuse, But the tears were coming. I'm not even gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. So then everyone's like, oh my gosh, you look so good. She was like, yeah, they did jailhouse braids on me. And she explains that some of the ladies that were in jail took out their extensions and decided to braid them into Karen's hair. Now, I'm not going to lie. I said, that's nasty, but it's the thought that counts, okay? Because, everybody's head and scalp is sensitive. I know my head is. So I was just like, okay. But it's the thought that counts, that these women thought enough of Karen and cared enough about like her appearance and things of that nature, and they wanted her to walk out being Karen Huger, that they took out their extensions and did her hair. And Karen was like, yeah, it was like, I didn't expect them to do that. I think someone ends up saying like, that was actually very sweet of them. And then Karen was like, yes, it was such a beautiful thought. She was like, it was really special. So they leave the foyer where they were like hugging each other and, just happy to see Karen initially. And then they go sit down in the den area. So Karen is just like, I hope I did the right thing when I was leaving jail. I waved to the people as we, drove by. I rolled down my window, but honestly, I really wanted to get home to see you guys. We then see her thank Raven, saying, I couldn't have done this without you. I'm so proud of the young lady or the woman that you're becoming. She goes on to say that, I hate that you saw me like this, but I'm glad you saw me like this, because this takes a lot of strength and fortitude and all of this stuff. Then she looks at her sister and she's like, little sister, thank you. She was like, mom would be so proud of you. And then the sister's response was such a sister's response, because she was like, we do what we do. And I said, yeah, duh. If you locked in with your old sister like that, you do what you got to do. Okay. Prison, jail, whatever. You got to, you stay locked in with your family. Okay. So then she turns her energy to Ray, and she thanks Ray, and she's just like, Thank you. He's like, well, maybe we could talk about that later. They were giggling. Karen says, it was nice to or fun to date you again. So it seems as though Ray was at the jailhouse like constantly to see Karen. Um, she brings up how he was the only husband talking about politics, but Ray was like, "Well, you told me to tell you what was going on out here, so I'm giving you all. I'm keeping you abreast of everything that's happening. All right." And Karen was like, "Well, yeah, I did want a little bit of information because we didn't get that much information and it was kind of hard to come by a TV while I was in there." So then they start talking about the young ladies that were in the jail. And Karen just says it was a lot of young girls in the jail. And Ray said, "Oh, that's sad. Like, oh, that's so disheartening to hear." And she was like, "You know what? But I got my hands on them, okay? And I feel like I was able to reach a few of them." She was like, "I told them it took me, 6 decades to get here. Why are you here at 20?" The way that Raven looked at her mama, I was like, I know you want to tell your mom that doesn't make sense and you sound dumb and you full of it right about now. Because I said, Karen, did you hear yourself? And this is when I realized, yeah, what I expected to see from Karen is not what I'm about to get. Because if Karen really sat back and listened to what she just said, you are shaming them for being in jail in their 20s versus you being in jail in your 60s. Is it okay for anybody to be in jail? No. Like for real, like you should don't do bad things, okay? But a lot of the dumb things people do in their 20s, going to jail is a lot more understandable because it's like, okay, you're young, you're stupid, you made a dumb decision, maybe you can get out and turn your life around. At 60, people are expecting you to have a certain type of wisdom and understanding of yourself in the world that you wouldn't get yourself caught up in such a way. So I say, yeah, Karen, you're not listening to yourself, okay? So then the conversation goes on and Karen says, I found a purpose while I was in there. And then you can tell that Karen was done talking where she was like, okay, I got to go take me a bath. I got to get this jail off me. Honestly, that would have been the first thing I did before we had a conversation. All the hugging, okay, let me go upstairs. I probably we wouldn't even had a sit down in that den. I'd have been upstairs washing the gel off my body. We see some of the cameramen and Karen is like, is this okay? Is this enough? Like, I need to get out these clothes and take a shower. Like I got but she was like, praise God, I'm out of jail. Praise God, I got to get this jail up off me. So time has passed. It's been at least 1 week since Karen has gotten out of jail. It is now September the 9th, 2025. And we see Andy pull up to Karen's house. And you can tell that Andy is geeked. Like Andy is excited to see Karen. He's excited to do this sit down. Because when Ray opened that door, Andy had the biggest smile on his face. He was like, Ray Huger. Okay. And you got Ray saying, hey, Andy. I forget that Andy was a journalist before he became Andy Cohen, like who we know him as now. So I could feel like he was excited to do the interview because like it taps back into his roots, but also he wanted to see Karen. So Andy and Ray are having like a little bit of chit chat in like the foyer of the house. And Andy's like, how you been, Ray? And Ray's like, I'm good. I'm really happy. And Ray's like, okay, that's good. Then Ray lets it be known that Karen's a little bit different, but like in a good way. So then Karen makes her entrance at the top of the stairs and she's like, hi, Andy. And you can tell she got good PR. The hair is not as blonde. It's a lot more. It's like a honey blonde because Karen only give us like 613 blonde, but she gave like a honey blonde. The outfit is very muted. It's giving she's showing up to this, or she's trying to present that she's showing up as Karen Huger, not the Grand Dame. Okay. And I said, good PR, Karen. So she's walking down the steps and Andy's like, wow, Karen, because she do look good. For her to be in jail for 6 months and to be 62 years old, the lady look good, okay? So they hug each other. Andy is like, it's so great to see you. Karen is like, it's great to see you too. Like, don't make me cry. And Andy's like, I was really thinking about you a lot. He was like, did you get my letter? And Karen is like, yes, but at first they didn't know if it really came from you. Like, they were like, this really can't be from Andy Cohen. And so they decided to scan the letter, and then I could read it on my iPad. And he's like, okay, you're kidding. He was like, that sucks because I sprayed Ladam on the letter. And Karen is like, are you serious? Now, some people thought Andy was lying, but I believe Andy did do that. Like, that's right up Andy's like alley. Cause Andy is he's a Andy is a queen. Like, Andy gives very, like, Andy loves the campiness and the dramatics of Housewife. Andy is a queen, okay? I don't know if he's a theater queen, but he's definitely a queen. So I could definitely see him writing a letter and spritzing some perfume on it to give it the effect. And also, like, the fact that when they first did BravoCon, they had like a Housewives museum or a Bravo museum, and it was like different moments in Bravo history. On top of that, they also had like products that the ladies have made or showcased on the show. So I definitely believe he would have Ladam either at his house, but definitely at the clubhouse in New York. So I believe he had the perfume. So she's like, oh my God, thank you, Andy. Thank you. So we end up seeing them walk into the kitchen or the dining room. And Ray was like, you'll be surprised by who you meet. So when they walk in there, we end up seeing Brandon, which is Karen's son, and her cousin, David. Now, we saw David during season 9 when Karen and him were sitting down and they were crying about the car crash. And David was on the phone with Karen and pretty much saying, like, lady, you traumatized me. But it seems like David loves Karen's dirty draws because he was so excited to see her. They hugged each other, and it was a cute moment. So then Andy finally gets to ask Brandon, Karen's son, like, how come you never around, or why are you always hiding from the cameras? Mind you, we've only seen David, I think, on camera one time. And that was either through, I think that was like season 2 or maybe season 3 of Potomac. And I remember he was like in a suit. Him and Karen were eating like lunch together. But other than that, we've never seen David. And that's when I realized that Ray was Karen's like second husband, because David is way older than Raven. Okay. And David looks like David looks like the male version of Karen. Okay. So he ends up saying, I'm hiding, I'm just a busy guy, Andy. And Andy ends up asking him, like, how do you feel? Like, what are your feelings right now? He's like, I'm just glad that my mom is back home. It was a trying time, but, I took on a lot of responsibilities. So Karen was like, he took over my business, which a lot of people did have questions about. Like, while she was in jail for those 6 months, like, who was running Ladam? Like, was she still doing the RPG show? Like, did she still have like a partnership or a brand ship with them? Like, so it's good to know that her son was still helping her out while she was locked up. Okay. And even Ray was like, yeah, he was doing a lot on the property, everything. And then we also find out that he did visit Karen as well very often. And Karen says, it wasn't the best, but it was a good time, like seeing my son through the glass. Okay. It was just such a surreal experience. And Karen says, like, yes, it was surreal. Brandon ends up saying, like, it was also like very tough, but Karen says it meant the world to me that he came and visited. The conversation continues on in the kitchen with Andy asking Karen, well, how long were you in jail? Karen tries to act like she don't know how long she was in jail, but I'll give her grace because maybe she didn't want to count the time because that would drive her crazy. But she was like, I didn't count. But then she ends up saying, well, I do believe it was 6 months. She said that the experience was surreal. And then Andy says, well, did it feel like 6 years? She was just like, jail was just a surreal experience for me. She also ends up like saying how they did a wonderful job, trying to keep her safe. At first, they didn't want to put her in general population, but she ended up saying, like, well, look, if God has me in here, there's a reason for me to be in here. And Karen says, I felt like I needed to be there to help with others, because there were children that were there that were the age of my kids. And she was like, I felt like, what can I do to help? So I started pouring into the young people and, talking to them about their lives. Okay. She says, I just wanted to, get to them. She also brings up her kids, saying like she just really wanted to spend time with her kids. She says, I just wanted to make sure that they were taken care of while I was in there. She said, when I got out and I was able to see my children, I got so, like, I was relieved. She said she was able to sit on their like back porch, and she got so sleepy because she says, my kids, I knew my babies were okay. Okay. And so then Ray brings up that Karen didn't have access to a phone while she was in jail. And Andy's like, that's good. Phones are evil. Look, the elders were right. It's these phones. They polluting our minds. Okay. And Andy says, well, are you using a phone now? And Karen just says, I'm really carteling it. She was like, I haven't really got back into it. She was like, yeah, I kind of look at things every now and again, but I'm not really into it like I used to be. I do have friends that want to tell me everything and want me to really look into stuff. But like right now, I'm not really doing that. So then Andy ends up saying, Karen, I want to pull you for a chat. So we actually see production set up in the den area, the same area where she did that one video where she was crying with the winter hat on. And they sit down, and Andy ends up saying as they walk into the den area, I came empty handed. All I have with me are my cards, And Karen says, I think that was intentional. So then Andy ends up saying, like, where do you want me to sit? And she was like, you can sit right here. So they sit down, and Andy asks her first question. You are a free woman. How does that make you feel? And Karen just says, I've been through hell, Andy. I said, here we go. I said, here we go with the shenanigans. She says, I've been through hell, Andy. And first of all, let's talk about the tape that broke the internet. I said, oh my God, Karen, do we have to? We have to? They start playing different clips of the body cam footage. And I said, stop. Like, I was cringing so hard. So the first clip we see is Karen asking the police officer while she's handcuffed in the cop car, like, do you know who I am? And he was like, I do not. Okay. And she was like, this is never going to touch me. That's how you know Karen's ego was so big that she was called the Grand Dame and that she was on Bravo, that she really thought that this was not going to really have an effect on her life. They then show all the tweets that came out when the body cam footage hit the internet. Now, do I think it broke the internet? No, but I definitely think it put it in shambles, because I remember friends of mine who know that I do YouTube or they know that I really like Real Housewives DMing me or texting me like screenshots of what they saw like on the Neighborhood Talk or on like OMFG reality. Like my friends were like, girl, what is happening? What is this? And I'm like, Jesus, girl, it's bad. It's bad. It's bad, okay? I thought that Karen, when she kept saying she was going to be vindicated, I thought the body cam footage wasn't going to be that bad. But then when it came out, I said, oh, Karen, you're going to jail. Like, it wasn't even her saying like, oh, I'm lit or I should have called a cab. It was when she was in the interrogation room and she told the police officer, because you're poor and white, I said, you're going to jail. Oh, they gonna lock you up, Miss Mama. And they did. Oh, I said, Karen, you are still very much so in Virginia. Oh my God. Okay. So then they enlarge one of the tweets that says, OMG, there's so many body cam videos of Karen. She will never live this down. And they're not lying, because when the trailer came out for, the reunion for Real Housewives of Potomac, this season 10, where she's yelling at Wendy saying, listen here, professor, shut the F up. People were really like split. Some people were like, yes, Karen, get Wendy together. But then other people were like, Thomas Jefferson's concubine can't tell me nothing with 4 DUIs. Girl, what? Like, people are not going to allow Karen to really like, she will never be able to be Miss Grand Dame of Potomac like she used to be. Like, Karen next season is probably going to have to like tone it down, because a lot of people are like, girl, you can't mother anybody and you're 62 with 4 DUIs and you just did a bid in jail. Like, so that comment someone tweeted out, is right, because there are a bunch of people that are like, girl, Karen would never be able to speak to me that way. And I don't disagree. As much as I like Karen, there would be no way she could ever speak to me condescendingly like the way she was speaking to Wendy. And granted, we haven't seen the whole clip, so Wendy could have said something, but you still couldn't talk to me like that, because I would be bringing up like, yeah, you did 6 months in jail because you're a drunk, you're an alcoholic, you're an addict. Don't speak to me like that, grandma. Like I would not be nice, okay? So they show different parts of the body cam footage. We got Ray on the scene trying to help Karen out. You have the police officer asking her, can we administer a field sobriety test? She's like, no, you cannot. Then Karen tries to walk away. When she walks away, the guy is like, the police officer pulls her back and then handcuffs her. And she's like, why are you doing this to me? And he's like, because you're drunk. You're intoxicated. You hear Ray say, please don't, which that like broke my heart, because I'm like, dang. So then she's in the car with the police officer, handcuffed, saying, they call me the Grand Dame. Then when she gets to the police station, she tells them she's lit. And the police officer is like, yeah, I know. That is why we arrested you. And then she's in the interrogation room saying that she's Thomas Jefferson concubine, that she's a very intelligent woman. I said, girl, first of all, why were you a concubine and why was it to Thomas Jefferson? What kind of race play you be into? Like, girl, what's going on with you? Okay. So, next thing you know, the screen goes black and we're back at Karen's house, and it says it's 539 days later since that situation went down. Karen tells Andy she didn't look at the footage. She was like, I didn't look at the footage and I didn't allow Ray to look at the footage, so she did not have input from her husband. Andy is looking at her like, you really didn't look at the footage? Okay. And Karen ends up saying that she really could not relate to what her lawyers were telling her because she did not look at the footage. They were telling Karen, like, girl, you need to take a plea deal because once this video comes out, it's going to nail you. So Andy was like, so they told you to take a plea deal and you didn't do it? And Karen was like, well, yes, but that's because I did not see the footage. And my thing about it is, like, even if you didn't see the footage, Karen, like, you still know you were drunk. You still know you were drunk. So even without the footage, you should have took a plea deal. Like you even if you didn't know it was that bad, you still know you got behind the wheel drunk, Karen. Girl. So Karen says, well, she was still in denial and still under the influence. So Andy said, under the influence of what? Like, put a name on it. She goes on to say prescription drugs and drinks, but alcohol. And she says, I was in denial. Andy says, so you were in denial? And she was like, yes, I was in denial. So then Andy was like, well, what about Ray? Like, Ray didn't tell you that you should probably take a plea deal or you should look at the footage? Like, he didn't inquire more? And Karen says that she isolated Ray from all of this. She wanted to handle this on her own, which is kind of crazy to me, because if you were going to isolate him from all of this, then you shouldn't have had him down at the scene of the crime trying to help you sift through your wallet to get your ID, lady. Like, if we gonna isolate me from it, isolate me from it. Okay, like... Oh, if I was Ray, I would want to know everything, because you had me like come out in the dead of night. Okay, I get to the scene of the crime. It's police officers, the fire department. The car is tore to smithereens. I need to know what's about to happen. Okay, so Andy ends up bringing up the rumor that he heard that I told you guys, where there was this rumor going around saying that Karen had the ability to take a plea deal where she only would have gotten 6 months of house arrest. So Andy ends up asking her, like, there's rumors going around that you had a plea deal for house arrest for a couple of months. And Karen was like, no, that's not true. So Andy said, so you didn't turn it down? And she was like, no, that's not true. So Andy is still perplexed at the fact that Karen did not watch the body cam footage, because he goes back saying, so you would not watch the body cam footage? And she was like, I couldn't watch it, Andy. And Karen ends up saying that when she went to rehab, she actually was like forced by her therapist to sit down and watch the footage. And said when she finally watched it, she was blown away. Like, totally blown away. And she said, and then I understood the sentence. So then Andy said, well, girl, weren't you already like this was before you were supposed to like get sentenced? And Karen was like, yes, I know. But she was like, I knew the sentence was coming. You know, the sentencing was coming. So then Andy said, so how did you not, like, do you ask yourself, how did you not watch this? And Karen said, well, let's not underestimate the powers of drugs and alcohol. And so then she ended up asking, well, did your kids watch it? And she was like, yeah, it was bad. It was bad. And Karen says, when I watched it, I literally broke down. Um, I could not believe that was me. Like I just couldn't believe it. So then Andy ends up asking her about the whole Thomas Jefferson concubine. He was like, so let's talk about Thomas Jefferson's concubine. What was that about? Expound. And she was like, nuts. Karen says, I was sick and I was nuts. To ever say something like that, and I said, girl, you had to be. I'm genuinely perplexed that Karen did not look at the body cam footage, y'all. Like I said before, she knew she was drunk. You may not have known how drunk you were, but like you knew you were drunk in that car. And I'm really looking at her like, you really thought being Karen Huger from Real Housewives of Potomac was going to like shield you from the consequences, girl. It's not like you Princess Diana where they have the money to like make this stuff go away. Like Karen, girl, Karen. So, and I also feel like they should have not taken Karen to rehab to use as leverage to get leniency on her sentence. I'm not saying that Karen shouldn't have went to rehab, but going to rehab before your sentencing didn't make sense to me. And granted, I am nobody's lawyer. That is not why I went to school, but to practice or study law or anything like that. But the thing about Karen in this situation, it reminds me of when I was 17 and I got a ticket for reckless driving. I was like going down a hill, instead of putting my foot on the brake, I just didn't put my foot on anything. And I think the speed limit was either 45 or 55, but either way, my car got up to like almost like 70 miles per hour. And I think that was considered like reckless driving. So I got pulled over by a female cop. She told me I had to go to court. So because I was a minor, my dad accompanied me. So I get there. Mind you, there are like 3 other kids in front of me with their parents. One girl, I don't know what was going on with her case. I think the cop was crooked and the judge understood that the cop was crooked. Another kid was doing donuts in a gated community, and I knew what gated community he was doing it in. And I was like, they got cameras all throughout that community. You were doing donuts near a golf course. You were going to get caught, sir. And then there was this cheerleader. She had like other 16 and 17-year-olds in her car. And in Virginia, when you're 16 and I think 17, you're not allowed to have other students or other kids in your car that are not like your sibling. Or I think when you turn 17, you can have at least one other minor in your car that's not related to you. But her car was full of 16 and 17-year-old girls that were all trying to get to either cheer practice or a football game. But she was going I think she was speeding in a school zone. I think she was going like 45 miles per hour and she got a ticket. Well, she did this defensive driving course that they issue out to people where it's an all-day situation where you're there from 8 a.m. to like 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. in the afternoon. You get like an hour break, but like they make people go to it to like get tickets off their record or to like make the ticket go away or whatever. But they always give it to minors. Her family made her do it in advance. And I could tell that the judge was like irritated, like extremely irritated at the fact that they did that because he felt like they were trying to get over on him. I think he ended up giving her like probation. Well, not probation, but she had to do like mandatory community service. When he got to me, my ticket got thrown out. Okay. He was actually kind of like surprised that I was there because when he looked at how fast I was going and then once I explained it to him, he was like, why did she give you a ticket? I said, sir, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Okay. And then he was like, here's a civics lesson. She not here. You don't get no ticket. So he ripped it up and told my daddy, just go pay your lawyer fees or court fees or whatever. But we didn't have a lawyer, so court fees. But yeah, I feel like maybe the judge felt like Karen and them were trying to get over on him by sending her to rehab. Now, I understand that the rehab that she went to, people were saying that the rehab actually prepares you to go to jail because it simulates jail. But still, I was just like, it's kind of a little too late. I would feel that way if I was the judge. Like, now all of a sudden, because you're about to go to jail, you want to act right and act like you got some sense when you could have been doing that years prior to this situation. But Let's continue on. So Andy ends up asking Karen, what's your relationship with alcohol now? Karen says that she does not drink and she's very sober. I said for right now, because Karen give very much that, like, if she's on Real Housewives of Potomac, she's not gonna drink on camera, but she's definitely gonna drink when them cameras go down, and probably might have like a stash somewhere. Because throughout this interview, you can tell that Karen really has not, like, she does not want to call herself an alcoholic, even though that is what she is. She thinks doing prescription drugs is a lot more glamorous, but like Karen is an alcoholic, okay? So Andy's like, so you are sober? And Karen's like, yes, I am sober. Karen ends up saying, like, I hate the fact that I made the decision to drink so much. Like it's like I shouldn't have done that. So Andy was like, yeah, it was really shocking, Karen. And Karen was like, it was shocking to me. So then Andy ends up saying, like, what about your children? Like, I know they seen the body cam footage, but how were they really? And Karen was like, my kids were devastated, completely devastated. And she said, there was a time that my kids wanted to talk to me about my addiction. And she says that was 20 years ago. They felt like I had a problem. My children felt like there was something wrong and they wanted to talk to me about it. That was 20 years ago when I had my first DUI. And there were a lot of things contributing to my unhappiness. She said Raymond had an inkling that there was this was a much more serious thing, and was like, Karen, you need to get help sooner than later. And I suggested, like, it wasn't that big of a deal. I would persevere through it. I went to the doctor. The doctor basically said, like, there was nothing really wrong with me. And then they started to prescribe me drugs. And so she was like, around that time when I got them, things got better. But then when my mom and dad passed away, I started to adjust the doses by doubling it. And I said, ooh, Karen, you're having a hard time admitting that, yes, you may have abused prescription drugs, but mama, you like to drink. You like to drink. And even Andy was kind of looking at her like, okay. And so Andy ends up asking her, so what was the prescription for? She says, I can't say. And Andy says, so you can't tell me what your prescription was for? She says, no, I can't say which one, but it was for antidepressants. And so Andy says, why can't you say what pills you was on? She was like, because I could get sued. I said, girl, and in what world would you get sued if you say, girl, I'm taking, Valium, or like for my anxiety, or, I take, what's another pill? I don't be taking pills. So I take something for antidepressants, or I take something for anxiety. No, like medical pharmaceutical company is going to sue you for explaining that this is the pills that you are taking, especially if they are prescribed. It's not their fault you abusing the drug. Karen, I said, Karen, you full of it. This moment took me out because I was like, Karen, you can't get sued by saying that you were abusing antidepressants and then saying what type of antidepressants. I said, Karen, what are we doing here? What are we doing? Karen ends up saying, I wasn't listening to my lawyers before, but now I'm listening to them. They're really good lawyers. She was like, things just manifested this way. So Andy says, so you're saying it was not so much the drinking, but it was the fact that you were self-medicating. And Karen is like, yeah. Pretty much. She was like, really up my dosage of pills. She said the drinks never called me. I never woke up wanting to drink. Andy said, but they called you that night. I said, oh, I said, get her, because they did call her that night, Andy. And she said, well, actually, the drink and the prescription drugs called me, Andy. Okay, both, not just the alcohol. Okay, and Andy was just looking at her like, Karen. So he says, you talk about alcoholism and the drink and the drinking wasn't calling you. And she said, yes, it didn't call me, Andy. I said, girl, then what is calling you, Karen? What is calling you? So Andy says, so what made you drink? And Karen says, well, I was trying to run away from home. And he said, well, why were you trying to run away from home? And Karen goes on to say, I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. Like, I wasn't happy here. She said, let's be clear. I said, okay, let's be clear. Because she let it, she said, let's be clear. Ray and I have been very honest about our marriage. She goes on to say, we've been honest about what we have been through, and our kids are gone and things of that nature, and the house just felt like a tomb, which means that Karen feels very lonely. That, like, Ray is old, he's set in his ways, and like she still wants to have fun and all of that stuff, but like to say your house felt like a tomb means that it feels cold to me. It feels very somber and sad. And she said that night I wanted to escape being unhappy. And I said, Karen, so it went from you were having drinks with your friend and the bar wasn't that far to now you were trying to escape being away from an unhappy hoe. Okay. So she then starts talking about the accident where she says, I had that accident and I'm just happy that I did not hit anybody. Like, thank God, because I could have killed someone. I was like, I'm glad you know that. I'm glad you know that. So Karen continues on by saying, like, I'm really grateful to be here. And Andy says, I'm grateful that you're here as well. So then Andy says, so what about the drinking and driving? And Karen says, I don't drink and drive. This isn't something that I do. That's how I know I was out of it. I said, this ain't something that you do, but you've done it 4 times. So then Andy says, but you've done it 4 times. I said, yes, clock it, Andy. Clock it, okay? And Karen said, well, no. Let's be clear about that. I have drank in the past, and I have situations like that, but I have not drank and drive. I don't have 4 DUIs, okay? Because Andy kept saying, but you have 4 DUIs, Karen. And Karen was like, no, I have 2 DUIs. The other 2 were like, I guess, DWIs, like they were drinking related. I said, either way, Karen, alcohol was involved, okay? Alcohol was involved, Karen. Like, we got to be honest. And then she said her last DUI she had was 20 years ago. I said, okay, girl. So the interview continues on with Andy asking Karen, so how were you able to get early release? Karen lets it be known that the moment she got into jail, she immediately started working. She took full responsibility for driving while under the influence, and she started to ask the staff, like, what can I do for work? The moment Karen started working, it started to chop off time on her sentencing. I'd have did the same thing. Like, girl, get me out of here quicker, all right? If I just got to wipe, some walls and mop, I will do it if it means I'm going to get free real soon. And so Karen says, she started working. Andy ends up saying, so what were you volunteering and working? Like, what did they have you doing? Karen said they allowed her to lead an NA class, which is Narcotics Anonymous, and an AA class, which is Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, who approved that? Because what qualifies Karen to be running anything when she just got sober like 3 days ago? Okay, so then Andy ends up saying, forgive me. I know you've done a lot of work, but what qualifies you in like to teach other people about sobriety? I said, thank you, Andy. Ask the right questions. So Karen ends up saying, well, I had treatment before my sentencing. And Andy was like, yeah, that's why you didn't come to the reunion, because that was in December. She said, yeah. I said, Karen, that also leads to his, like, it aids in his question. Like, you weren't qualified. You just got out of treatment a couple of weeks before you went into jail. Like what? Karen. Karen. Like, Karen was really operating from her ego, even in jail. Like, how are you mother hen or the den mother? And you're like, Karen, you should have been in there really like taking in everything. At the end of the day, you are no better than any of the women that are in there. Yes, you are on a reality TV show. Yes, when you got out, you were probably in a way, way better situation because you had people that loved you, to like, you had a home, you had a husband, you got kids that care about you. You have family members that care about you that were waiting for you at home to welcome you with open arms. But at the end of the day, you were in jail with these women. Okay, you made bad decisions just like they did. So to act like you needed to be there to like really speak to them about their issues when it's like, girl, you don't even have a real handle on yours is beyond me. So Karen makes it be known that she didn't get any special treatment while she was in jail. The opportunity to work with cutting down your sentence is available to everybody. Okay. So then they start talking about her relationship with Ray. And Karen basically says while she was in jail, her and Ray really worked on their marriage. And she says, they really talked about things that contributed to her unhappiness. And they talked about like what was really tormenting her. Like, and Karen says, I had to face a lot. Andy ends up asking, what tormented you? And Karen said, when I discovered during my healing that I stopped growing emotionally at the age of 19, she was like, I had to like look at that situation and face those feelings head on. She said it made a lot of sense and it was an aha moment for her. She said it was my hurt that was pretty much holding me back. She said that pain at 19, Andy brings up how Karen unfortunately at 19 was sexually assaulted. And she says, yes, like she was like, I basically shut down emotionally after that situation. But she says, now that I have identified my trauma, I can move forward and it allowed me to really fight for my sobriety. She says, I am a human being who had an addiction. She said, certainly alcohol played a role. So then Andy brings up, you're really owning the narcotics piece of this, but what about the alcohol? Like, what about that? So Karen was like, you want to talk about the alcohol? And like Andy's like, yes, let's talk about the alcohol. She was like, okay, let's talk about it. I said, yeah, Karen, because he clocking you. I will give Andy that. There were some moments where I wanted Andy to really like push at Karen, but all in all, the questions that he asked her and the way that he was doubling back to be like, no, girl, you had 4 DUIs. Girl, the alcohol called you. I feel like he did a really good job with this sit down with Karen, okay? So Karen says, so let's talk about it. She said it was really hard for her when she was with her therapist to convince her that she had a drinking problem. She was like, it was easier for her to accept the whole narcotics and prescription drug situation because she said at the end of the day, a doctor wrote that for me. So the onus was on the doctor, not really on herself. She could blame the doctor. She said, but alcohol was me picking up the bottle and numbing myself. I had to take responsibility for that. So then Andy says, do you think you have an issue with alcohol? Karen says, I thought I did, and yes, I did. And she said, and let me tell you how I want to address this. So at some point, you could tell throughout the interview that Karen was really trying to like lead the interview for real, for real. And I think that's why Andy didn't push as hard as he could, but she still gave us a lot of information. She says, I had definitely had a drinking problem, okay? She says, I am a person who is choosing to live a lifetime in recovery on both ends, drugs or alcohol. So then Andy ends up saying, when's the last time you had a drink? And Karen said, I would say it was after my accident. So then Andy ends up saying, well, do you consider yourself an alcoholic? And you could tell that Karen, Karen still is struggling with that. Because when she did this, like she knows she's an alcoholic, but I think Karen is afraid to like really label herself as that. But it's like, ma'am, Miss Mamas, you're an alcoholic, Karen. Like 4 DUIs or 2 DUIs and 2 times that you've had issues with alcohol, you're an alcoholic. And I promise you, there have probably been way more instances where Karen had Karen drinking and driving than she can probably count, but those were instances where she did not get caught. Because 4 makes me feel like you have way more. Okay? And you just was able to really like focus driving home knowing good and well you was drunk. Okay? So Andy is looking at her to figure out if she's going to say, yes, I'm an alcoholic. She ends up saying, I consider myself a person and living in a lifetime of recovery because there are 2 drugs I don't underestimate either. But you can call yourself a drug addict and an alcoholic, and it doesn't diminish either or, Karen. Okay. He goes on to say that when people label themselves as a drug addict or as an alcoholic, is oftentimes used to like shame people. And Karen basically says for herself, she is choosing to label herself as someone living in a lifetime of recovery because she's dealing with both. Like she can't ignore one or the other. But she says, but until you identify what it is, you can't really heal. And I said, well, Karen, you're not really identifying that you are an alcoholic, ma'am. So Andy ends up asking Karen, like, do you go to meetings? Like, basically, do you attend AA or NA? And she says, I do. She was like, I have a group. I really like the group. Treatment goes on. She says, everything is ongoing. She says, I'm still in recovery. So then Andy brings up the Washington Post. He's like, they were following the case, since your arrest. And basically, they reported that you told the judge that you promised to attend AA for life. Karen says, I did not say that basically, but I do attend AA, and she thinks it's important, but she prefers NA. Okay. And she was like, because it's more raw. I said, okay, girl, I would think both are. Okay. You got people relying on substances to numb themselves. I think both of them can be raw, but all right. Karen says she supports anyone who says AA or NA is important to them and has helped them. She goes on to say that I'm still in recovery. Or I'm still, living a life of recovery. Andy brings up her outfits. I guess people were wondering who brought her the outfit to wear outside of jail. I didn't care about that. So I was like, okay, it don't matter to me. So then Andy ends up asking her, like, what did you wear in jail? And she was like, a beige jumpsuit. And she was like, I might not wear beige for a long time. And Andy was like, well, girl, you got on beige right now. Like, what are you talking about? And Karen was like, no, Andy, this is blush. And he said, okay. And she's like, yeah, it's blush. So they start talking about who brought her the clothes in jail. It was her makeup artist, Tati, and things of that nature. So then Andy says, what did you miss the most when you were in prison? And Karen says, it gave me a good opportunity to see what was important to me. She said, what I missed the most was like holding hands with my daughter. She said, when I knew things were it was time to crunch time, that I knew I was probably going to jail. Me and Raven are very close, and we were sleeping downstairs on the couch. And one night I woke up and I just held her hand in my hand and I took a picture of it because I knew I was going to miss that. Now, I was like, girl, was Raven asleep when you did it? Because the hand was limp. The hand or your hand was limp. Either way, I was like, girl, okay, Karen. So Andy ends up asking, like, what did it feel like to be stripped down? Karen says, well, let's be clear. I wasn't stripped down. I still wore my lace bra and my lace panties. I said, Karen, clearly he was talking metaphorically. So like I said, Andy ends up saying, Karen, I meant that metaphorically. Karen ends up telling Andy that she still had her wigs on her and everything, but it was nice to get out of her lashes. She then brings up like finally like seeing her hair and seeing all the salt and pepper in her hair. But I'm just like, girl, do you not take those wigs off when you get home and you see your braids? Like, is it glued? Like, you keep it glued down all the time, Karen? I'm confused, okay? But she says she's gonna let her hair go completely white. And Andy, supports because his hair is almost damn near white. So he then ends up asking her, what was your cell like? Did you have a roommate? Karen ends up saying she didn't have a roommate, but she did have a cell. She was like, it was not a room. It wasn't a boudoir. There was no cushion. It seems like Karen is really trying to like let Andy understand and let the viewers understand that like she did not get special treatment in jail. Like, she was really living the experience of being in jail. Okay. I didn't really think Karen was going to get special treatment in jail. I mean, maybe there would probably be a few inmates that took a liking to her because of her status of being on Real Housewives of Potomac. But Karen isn't somebody that famous where she would get treated like royalty in jail. So she brings up having the steel toilet and the steel sink. And she was like, I was like, how many people have sat on here? And so then Karen noticed that some of the girls in the unit were suffering really bad menstruals. And so she ended up going to one of the staff saying like, look, my cycle is horrendous. I said it had to be a man or a younger girl, because I'm just like, girl, you're 62. You're going through menopause. You're not having a period. You're not. But they end up giving her like 7 pads. And so she took the pads and she lined her toilet with the pads, which I thought was actually a smart idea. So then Karen says, I love the fact that I'm from the country. At first I was like, what does the country have to do with you going to jail? like you being Southern and from the South and stuff. But then I started to think, I was like, oh, she's probably talking about having ingenuity. So I was like, okay, girl. So Andy ends up saying, like, walk me through a day in prison. Like, what time did you have to wake up? Karen says she got up at 4:30 in the morning because breakfast was at 5. She says she liked the discipline of being in jail. She said she needed that to be honest with herself about this situation and to keep her on the straight and narrow with her sobriety. She said the structure was definitely needed. So Andy's like, so you wake up, you have breakfast at 5 a.m. Like, did you enjoy the food? Karen said, no, girl, I survived off of astronaut food. Basically, like packets of like crab meat, tuna, and potentially chicken. Okay, but she says she didn't eat the dirty bird once Andy asks her that. And the conversation continues on with her saying, like, after lunch, she would spend the rest of her time, like, either going to her volunteering stuff or she would go work out. And so Andy said, okay, so you at least were able to go outside. Karen was like, yeah, but I didn't see grass for 6 months. That is sad to me, because to think about people who are in jail for like a lot of time, for like years, and to know that like they don't get to touch grass or see grass is, that would alter your brain. Like for real, like I feel like you need to touch grass. You need to see like trees and stuff. Like you need that. We need that. So Andy says, so after dinner, like what, like that's when she talks about going to the rec center and all that stuff. She ends up saying that lights go out at 9:45. So then Andy ends up asking her, like, what was it like your first couple of days in jail? And she said it was scary. She said one night she was crying to God saying, Lord, I'm scared. Like, give me the strength. So Andy moves on from that and he ends up asking her, like, how do you feel about going back into the hornet's nest of the reunion situation? And Karen said, look, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. So then Andy brings up, well, the last time you were in rehab during filming last year. And Karen admits that she has yet to watch the reunion. So he's like, okay. But Andy lets her know that like the ladies weren't dragging you. It was like very measured. It wasn't like pile on Karen. Everybody actually like brought up like legitimate concerns and really talked about your relationship with alcohol. So he was like, we got a few clips for you. So then we see one of the producers comes out with a Mac and then he shows Karen one of the clips from the reunion. Andy ends up showing Karen a clip from the reunion and they're talking about the body cam footage. Everyone is still like perplexed as to why Karen would want to have a trial. Ashley ends up saying, like, I don't get why she would want to have a public trial. She got bad legal advice from her lawyers. As the conversation continues at the reunion, I think Jacqueline and Stacey were like, well, maybe she didn't see the footage and she didn't know how bad it was. And then Wendy ends up saying, well, clearly, like somebody like was aware of how bad the footage was because they were trying to suppress the body cam footage, which is true because I do remember reading an article about that. You can tell that Karen is irritated that Wendy is even speaking about her situation because in the little cube that they have her in, she kind of like tenses up or kind of readjusts herself. Giselle ends up screaming that Karen is big delusional, and she also says that Karen was actually the one that she heard was pushing for a public trial. So then Ashley ends up saying that I really want to ask Karen, like, who was in the car with her, because she did make a comment saying that somebody fled the scene. So when they do flashback to the body cam footage, you do hear Karen say, like, you know, they hopped out, you know, the security you hired for me. So Karen was making it seem like she was not the one driving, that somebody else was driving, and they left her at the scene of the crime. Okay. So then the conversation continues on at the reunion where a question is asked, like Karen says she was getting drinks with her girlfriends, like why has nobody come forward? And everyone's like, they don't really believe that anymore. Giselle ends up saying that I heard that Karen was at a restaurant that was probably like 4 minutes away from her house and she thought that she could make it. So then Wendy ends up saying like she was going to say something, but she doesn't say anything. And Karen has this like real perturbed face on. So then Ashley ends up saying, well, you know, somebody asked me while like I was like on the metro or something, like, hey, do you like, are you like on that show with Karen? And Ashley's like, yeah. I told them, yeah, I'm on that show with Karen. And then they Googled who Karen is. And then they were like, oh, Karen used to get drunk all the time at Legal Seafood at Montgomery Mall. She would come in there every day drinking. So then Wendy chimes in and she says, I wasn't going to say anything, but since you're saying something, somebody came up to me at a certain restaurant, asked me if I was on the show with Karen. I told them yes. And then they said to me that Karen comes in here and she gets drunk every single day, or she drinks every single day. I believed them back then because that's what Sharice and Robin and all of them were telling us. They told us that Karen would call them drunk, cuss them out, and they would giggle and laugh at it. So clearly, if you're calling them drunk and cussing them out, and you slightly don't remember, or you do remember what you're doing when you're getting drunk, then I can believe that you're going down to the local bar and getting plastered. And Sharice even said that Karen was known as like the town drunk. Like that was her claim to fame in the community. So I'm just like, I believe it. So Karen basically says Ashley is right about Legal Seafood, but that happened 20 years ago. And she said Wendy, she has no idea what she's talking about because who would ever talk to Wendy? She lives in Timbuktu. I don't really understand what Karen's gripe is with Wendy. It's not computing. And when she had the opportunity in this interview to like explain, she was like, me and Wendy need to have a conversation. And I'm like, about what? So Karen ends up saying what Ashley was saying was true, but that was during the time when she was, I guess, like really heavily self-medicating and when she sought medical help, So she was like, that's not too far off. And then she ends up saying that the only thing that Ashley was wrong about was that somebody being in the car with her. So then Andy says, what is your reaction to their conjecture relating to your legal advice? And Karen says, I don't think they're wrong for jumping to conclusions. I'm not angry at anyone. So then Andy ends up playing Karen's like farewell message. And in that message, remember, Karen only thanked like Candace, Andy, Kiarna, and then she snubbed Wendy. And Wendy ends up saying, that is not my friend. And Karen says, oh, like, I'm like, Karen, like, I'm so confused what her beef is with Wendy. So Andy lets it be known that Wendy was very upset that Karen didn't thank her in her video, that you mentioned Candace, Kay, and you even mentioned me. And Wendy felt like she was very supportive to you during that whole entire season. So why, like, Andy's like, why did you exclude her? And so then Karen ends up saying, I think that a conversation needs to be had between Wendy and I. We had a friendship, but then she says, our friendship is worth a conversation. She ends up saying, Wendy knows why I didn't mention her. And I'm like, does she? Because I don't think nobody knows why you didn't mention her, Karen. So then Andy says, did you really feel supported by the ladies? And Karen ends up saying, Giselle did a great job reaching out and trying to contact Ray and communicating to him and stuff like that. But I kept telling Ray to give everybody the same spiel. Thank you. I appreciate it, but I'm only talking to family. She said the only person that didn't reach out to her was Wendy. Like, so that tells you enough. But I'm like, if I get on that reunion stage and you snub me, why the hell am I going to visit you in prison? Girl, rot in there. Like, I'm confused, Karen. You can't snub somebody and think that they're supposed to have all this grace for you and like put themselves in a predicament to call up there to see when visitation hours are, get patted down, and be in prison with you. Like, it's not worth it. I wouldn't call you either, lady, or visit. So Andy ends up saying, some of the viewers feel like maybe this is not the platform, or you don't deserve this platform, or you don't deserve a second chance. And Andy says, how do you feel about that? Karen ends up saying, I don't know how I feel about that. She was like, I have to earn back, like, I guess people's trust. Like, but I'm grateful to the Bravo family. She says, I felt very loved and very supported. She was like, sometimes Bravo gets a dirty shake, but you guys have like treated me very well. And I appreciate that. I don't know if Karen should come back. Like, I was really excited for Karen to come back, but like sitting here, I'm just like, girl, are you really going to get clean? Like, are you really going to live this life of like recovery? What are we doing here? So then Andy ends up saying, like, some people will ask, like, do you think the show contributed to your issues? And Karen says, no, you saved me. It saved me. She said the show actually saved me. It occupied me. I think if I would not have been on the show, I would have spiraled out a lot quicker a long time ago. She said the show gave me discipline. It gave me routine. And I don't hate that. She was like, I can't blame the show. Like, the show isn't responsible for what I did. And I will be honest, at first I was like, did the show give her discipline? But then when I thought about it, it does. They have call times. She has to be ready to do interviews, do confessionals. Like, yeah, I can see the show giving her discipline to a certain extent. And her saying that she would probably spiral out quicker makes sense, because it's like, if all you were doing was sitting at home and just like going to bars and just drinking and shopping and that's it, eventually that would probably make you snap out. Like, yeah, that would probably make you, and you would probably do something stupid. Okay. So she was like, I am the one that's responsible for me. So Karen finally says that she has the disease of alcoholism, but she does not call herself an alcoholic. She also says that she has a disease of abusing prescription drugs and things of that nature. As the conversation continues on, Andy ends up asking her, with going through all of this, do you think this is going to change the way that you look at the petty drama on the show and how you had to deal with things on the show? Karen ends up saying, like, right, like, it is different. I'm not the same as who I used to be, but I think I'm better. She also says, Ray has a totally different wife. He has a stranger now. And she said, Ray said, if I got this monkey off my back and we decided to be together, he could let me go. He wouldn't want to let me go, but if for some reason we find out that we could no longer be the best that we could be, he was okay with letting me go. Basically, I translated that into my mind of Ray saying, once you are truly clean, like, I mean really clean, then I can divorce you, or we can separate and I can move down to Florida or where else. Maybe he could go to Virginia Beach, where he can golf all day, go to the beach sometime, but he isn't walking distance or driving distance to everything, and he's not so worried about you. Because I would think, if Karen 20 years ago, the family was already saying that Karen has a problem, he's been dealing with this for a very long time with Karen. Okay. And so Andy was kind of taken aback by that. And Andy says, so what was your reaction to that? And Karen says, Ray and I are still a work in progress. And that's really all I got right about now. She's like, I'm still trying to move forward. She was like, I haven't reacted to it. Andy says, this is kind of moving, but also it's actually heartbreaking. But Karen says, but that's my reality and I have to live in reality. And Andy says, I know a lot of sober people who really do process things differently. He also says that some people realized that they were putting a band-aid over something, or they were running away from something. So what were you putting a band-aid over, and what were you running away? So then Karen says, honestly, when your soul is ripped out, she's talking about when she was essayed. She was like, and then you go home and you tell your family members and they don't believe you. Like, that marks you, regardless. That marks you. And then I was tasked with putting myself back together. And that's horrible. And you think about how old Karen was, and like, they were in Virginia, Southern Virginia at that. There probably were no resources for people to talk to those who have been assaulted. And it depends on the person that did assault her. Was it a family member? Was it a prominent person in the town? Like, the fact that her family didn't believe her probably even crushed her even further. And then not having help with mending her own heart or making herself feel whole had to be tough for her. But Karen says, I come from a line of strong Black women, so it was easy for me to do. She says, right now, I have really gotten to know Karen. And she says, I think she's pretty cool. And that's the biggest revelation that I've took from this, because, I really didn't know who I was. Now, do I think Karen really knows who she is? No, I don't. I think it takes years for somebody to really, especially when you've been in denial for so long, to really sit down and like look at yourself and look at a mirror. To be honest, I think Karen has started the steps of really getting to know herself. But do I think she totally knows herself? No. So Andy says, to me, it seems like the biggest thing is that you were in denial. And with all due respect, that's just something I just needed to tell you. But it seems as though that you have came a long way. And Karen says, it took a long time. And she says, I also sort of forgive Karen and I just love her now. She's like, I'm excited to see where things go. So Andy ends up telling Karen, I am extremely proud of you. And Karen says, I want to encourage others. And she also thanks Andy for allowing her to like be the author of her own story. And, they hug each other and then they flash across the screen, if you need help with addiction, call the hotline. All right. I don't know, y'all. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with Karen if she comes back. I think not if, we know she coming back for season 11, but the way that I felt about Karen coming back before this interview is definitely different than what I felt before. I was really like excited. Now I'm like, Karen, I don't know how you about to play this. Like, I don't think you can come back as like Mrs. like the grand dame being condescending or anything of that nature. I think you have to really humble yourself. And I think you do have to stand true to your word of I'm coming back as Karen Huger, not Karen Huger, the grand dame. Like, I feel like if you stand on that, you will be given so much grace. But anytime you try to pull the whole grand dame of it all, you are going to get a lot of pushback. Now, Karen does have loyal fans. But again, I bring up when Karen on the reunion trailer for season 10 told Wendy to shut the F up, it was such a, like, it was a clear divide. Like, some people were like, who the does Karen think she talking to? Like, how does she think she has the nerve and the audacity to say anything to Wendy when, girl, a DUI is way worse than committing fraud in a lot of people's eyes because you could have taken somebody's life. But then you have other people being like, no, that's what we have Karen here for. She gonna wrap the girls up. So I don't know. I really don't know how it's gonna end or how Karen is going to fare, but I'm interested in seeing. But that is it, you guys. That is all. As always, remember to be bravely authentic. Definitely hop down in them comments below. Subscribe to the channel, and I'm out, y'all. Deuces.